Welcome to this RTS preview and Q&A of Danny Boy, BBC Two's brand new single drama about the Battle of Danny Boy, which took place in Iraq in 2004, and the inquiry, obviously, that followed in its aftermath. The drama focuses on the medal-winning British soldier Brian Wood, who was accused of war crimes by the human rights lawyer Phil Shiner. Now, I've been lucky enough to see this film, and I promise you, it doesn't matter how much you do or don't know about the inquiry or anything that happened. This is a really eye-opening, thought-provoking watch. It's one of those that stays with you and will do for weeks afterwards. So I can't wait for you to see it if you haven't had the chance yet. Before we start this conversation, and I've got a great panel to introduce you to, just a reminder that this is your chance to ask questions as well, not just mine. So whenever a question pops into your head, just write it in the little chat box below. You don't have to wait till the end or the right time. Just put it in there. And then at the end, I'll ask all your questions to the panel. Also, for any journalists here today, any quotes from the panel are embargoed until next Wednesday. That's the 5th of May, Wednesday, the 5th of May. It would be fantastic if you could just make a little note of that. Any questions or problems, do just speak to Gareth at the BBC and he'll sort you out. We have a lovely panel with us this afternoon. So let me introduce you. We have director Sam Miller, BAFTA-nominated director Sam Miller as of today. Hello, Sam.
Thank you.
Hello. Writer Robert Jones is with us as well. Hello, Robert.
Hi.
Hello. Executive producer for Expectation, Sue Horth is with us. Hello, Sue.
Hi, Emma. Nice to see you.
Hi. And from the cast, we have Toby Jones, who plays Phil Shiner in Danny Boy. Hello, Toby.
Hi there.
Hello. So thank you all for joining us. Before we start, I'd like to say that unfortunately Anthony Boyle isn't with us. We were hoping he would be, but he has got an incredible filming schedule. So that's where he is. And we'll be taking a little look at his performance later on. In the meantime, why don't we get into the mood for this by watching the trailer for Danny Boy.
They'll tell you you're a bleeding heart. They'll tell you you're naive. British soldiers get away with murder.
Give you a medal with one hand and knock your teeth out with the other. And I say so or what? The men are trying to kill you.
They get your head in a spin, Dad. They get you to start thinking what you did.
You did a good job.
If you're fired up and you've been shot at and you're charging across a field, where does the war bit stop? And the arrest and restraint bit start?
If these people want to go and make war a crime, it's up to them. I fought for my country, and I'm proud of what I did.
We believe that many of those killed were not soldiers at all.
Well, at school said you were a murderer.
Do I look like a murderer to you?
Searching for truth in the fog of war. Danny Boy on BBC Two and iPlayer.
There you go. That gives us a good flavour of what to expect. Sue, if I could start with you. I understand this has been a number of years in development, hasn't it, Danny Boy? How did it first come about?
Yes. So Colin, my creative partner, and I, we've made a lot of films that are rooted in quite complex real events, and they always take a little bit of time to think about and to develop. We've made quite a lot of stories about soldiering and the responsibilities and the complexities of soldiering. So this came about because we were interested in this period. We were interested in the experiences of soldiering in Iraq and some of the fallout that came from that. But when we came across Brian's experience, that really struck us as crystallizing a lot of really interesting and important things. So there was obviously the immediate sense that here, what does it feel like? Imagine being a soldier who's fated for your heroism in war, who is awarded a medal, and at the same time is effectively accused of being a war criminal. How does that feel inside that emotional experience? At the same time, what are those split-second decisions like that are taken in a moment in combat that are then scrutinized with the full glare of legal expertise after the events? And then that third component for us that was so compelling was that Brian comes from a family with sort of 300 years heritage of military service, whose father himself is a soldier, and Brian, of course, is a father too. So that intimate family experience of having exploring those relationships with a father who's also a soldier and with a son who's questioning what you may or may not have done, that felt really rare to us. We rarely see that in drama. So we were really, irresistibly drawn to try and explore all those things.
So it really was about finding that story to tell a bigger story about that time.
Yeah, I think it's often, I think when you are trying to bring real events that are this complex to an audience, the most effective way in is through a very distinctive singular perspective, a microcosm, if you like. And Brian's perspective, his emotional experience, sits at the core of our drama. There are other really important perspectives that shine a light onto that, but it's the themes that Brian himself was, or the themes that we were able to explore as dramatists through Brian's experience, that made it feel like a piece of drama that we could do some interesting things with.
And Robert, it's your beautiful script. What was it about this for you that felt so compelling, and why did you want to explore it?
I think Sue's right. We did look at a lot of possibilities when wanting to do something about both Iraq and the way that soldiering is looked at after the event, I suppose. It seemed that if you wanted to look at the sort of political and moral complexity of war and the emotional complexity for those who are sent to fight it, this just seemed to have everything, because it goes, Brian himself goes right across the spectrum from being awarded a medal for valor to going through a public inquiry as being accused of war criminal. And it just, it seemed a perfect tableau for that, I suppose, for looking at that. And Brian himself, such a personable and so open to the way we, to talking about how we could do this, which I think is probably unusual amongst soldiers. He seems particularly happy to look at his actions and those, soldiering generally from both sides.
Sorry, go on, Sue.
Well, I was just going to add to Robert that, as storytellers, it gives us the chance to invite the audience to consider things that we don't often have to consider. Those moments in combat where a split-second choice can have huge consequences and huge ramifications. Those are things that we don't often explore dramatically. And so besides the kind of events after Iraq, this gave us the opportunity to explore what it feels like to remember combat and to question yourself and to have those explorations of conscience that a process like this one forces on someone like Brian.
There's a lot of complex ideas and feelings to explore here, Robert. Was it always going to be a 90-minute drama, and how challenging was it to condense it into one drama?
It did actually start as 2 times 60. And I think I can't remember if I've written the two full 60s. I certainly started with 60. And I think in a way it just called out for being a one-off. And in a way that made a lot of editorial decisions for us, because there is so much we've done, and Sue in particular, but we've all done such a lot of research on both what it was like there in Iraq and what it was like in the inquiry. And there's reams and reams and reams of stuff on both. And in fact, it probably helped, I think, to tell a punchier story, to be forced to condense it, rather than be allowed to expand it to perhaps beyond. Also, I think it felt easier to tell the story through both Brian and Phil Shiner, to a lesser extent, because we were allowed, I think the fact that we only had 90 minutes meant we couldn't spend forever in the inquiry. So we were forced to tell the story on our characters and in their lives and in their families and in their work, rather than allow the inquiry procedure to tell the story for us, I think.
And in their limited field of view as well, which is itself part of the storytelling, which I think offers us interesting thematic opportunities too.
And so it is a story about real people. You've mentioned Brian's involvement there. Did you have to be mindful making a drama like this about certain sensitivities? It's based on real events and real people's lives.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real privilege to tell stories that are based in truth, and it brings, you know, extra layers of challenge and fascination. And one of the great joys is that you get to access people's real experiences and to understand them, and then to evaluate them dramatically and to figure out how to express those experiences in a way that tells a dramatic story and also reflects something authentic about their lived experience. And I think you just have to be sensitive to the experience that people have of retelling things to you and to anybody else, their memories, sometimes their emotional trauma that they're carrying with them. Yeah, I mean, it's a really rich experience. I always feel that real experiences bring such richness to scripts. So it's a great privilege to have to navigate those challenges, I think.
I mean, sort of follow on from that, Sue, you know, I was very aware, you know, working with Robert and Sue as we went through the early stages of pre-production before meeting Brian, was, you know, just the sense that we were sort of delving into a story that had become a defining sequence for Brian, you know, just defining sequence in his life, because the ramifications were so huge, you know. And so there was a sort of, that sort of comes with a lot of responsibility for us as storytellers, you know, as to how do we sort of be honest with that and get into that and, you know, not duck it, you know, not avoid it. And I mean, the first thing Brian said to me, you know, when we first started talking about the storytelling, was I was 22. You know, his youth, how young he was when this thing happened. You know, and it kind of it really caught me that he was still sensing that, you know, how young he was when he went into that sequence. I think also the fact that, you know, what I came to realize was that the British troops were there as peacekeepers. They weren't there to fight. And yet they were being drawn into conflict all of the time, you know. So the soldiers were going out there thinking, oh, we're going to go into this situation where we're going to try and maintain order. In actual fact, it was kind of a much, much darker, much more full-on battle was raging, you know, between forces. So I think those two things sort of really stuck with me.
Was he on set for those battle scenes, Sam?
He was, yeah. It was really fascinating how we, you know, I really loved meeting him, and it felt an honor to sort of be given the, you know, how to pull this together and tell the story. And but at the same time, you're always worried. I was worried about how Anthony and him would interface, you know, because Anthony's got the responsibility to live this story, you know, and that can be quite difficult when you're in the presence of someone that's actually lived it. So we kept Brian's involvement to the battle scenes and to the military process, which he was extraordinary. You know, his attention to detail, his eye for it, the way he helped us was just incredible. You know, I mean, in so many different ways. You know, he was amazing for the costume department, the armory department. You know, amazing for us in terms of how we staged the battles and how they actually happened. And then to actually be, you know, either in a rehearsal room or on the battlefield, you know, getting a first-hand account of how close, you know, the proximity of someone who's trying to kill you, or, you know, the exact nature of those events, was a real, you know, honor and a joy to do it, you know, a privilege to do it.
It must have been a challenge for you, because sometimes you're doing almost a legal drama, sometimes you're on battlefields. It's
interesting. It felt, in some ways it felt like two films, you know, because Toby's story, Phil Shiner's story, was so rich as well, and was so intricate and dense and so well articulated by Robert. You know, it felt like we were making two films. There was the emotional story of Brian's experience and what that was like as a young soldier, and then this huge legal machine that had to gear up to kind of question what happened. So you know, it did feel when we finally, Toby, when we got into Shiner's office and you looked at the kind of, it was a different kind of battle, you know. It was like these vast, intricate, complicated scenes, which Toby just had to completely boss and completely kind of keep. So it was it did feel a little bit like two films in a good way, you know, because the story was about the balance between those two elements. This, you know, the complexity of the film lies in being able to tell those two stories, you know, 100% and leave a balanced view of that, you know, to allow the audience to come in and try to grapple with it. So,
Toby, how much did you know about this inquiry and about Phil Shiner before you were sent the script?
I didn't know much about this specific inquiry. I remember it being on the news, but I didn't know it in any detail. By chance, you know, my wife's a barrister, and when I mentioned Phil Shiner, obviously he's, you know, become a major story in terms of the legal profession, and so she knew about him, and so I was made aware of him, and then friends of ours who are lawyers all know exactly who Phil Shiner is. So, I was well aware of him before I even saw the script, as it were. But no, I'm not in any detail, not in the kind of detail that, you know, you have to get to know it when you're working on it.
What did she make of you being offered this part when it's such a notorious person in her profession?
Oh, well, you know, it's great to play. The drama itself was so compelling, and the script is compelling. You know, often with projects, you know, it's the character or the project, and here I was immediately sort of engaged with the story of Brian, and then, you know, the function of my character within that is obviously, you know, critical to exploring the fog, the ambiguity in the story. So obviously, yeah, I'm really interested in it, and very proud to be part of a 90-minute film on BBC, of which they don't come along that often anymore. And just what Robert was saying, you know, there's something very powerful about seeing a film in concentrated form. And yeah, so there wasn't any doubt in my mind. The whole thing seemed so unarguable from the script.
It strikes me as exactly the kind of drama that after you've seen it, you go on the internet and need to know more about it. Did you find yourself getting wrapped up in lots of research?
Yes, to a certain extent. I mean, it's, you know, without getting too much into, you know, what it's like to act. I often, you know, the role of research is in a way to, you know, you're looking at the story, the function of the character in the story. What's the most interesting way to play the character in the story? You know, what's the most rounded way to play the character in the story? What's the way? That's your primary job as an actor, to understand the function in the story, and then the reason, a lot of the research about, you know, the ins and outs of what happened are of interest, but they may not pertain directly to the drama. The drama is about, you know, characters interacting, making right decisions, making wrong decisions, and making ambiguous decisions, and that's really your main role here. And, you know, to a certain extent, you know, I wasn't able to meet Phil Shiner, and so in that sense, you know, there was a sense of really depending on the strength of the script.
And Robert, there was a lot of coverage of this inquiry at the time, and a lot of it was outrage, a lot of it was emotional. We're a little bit away now. So it's a little bit of an echo. Did it give you a chance to explore in a different way, being able to get at this in a dramatic perspective?
Well, having some distance from it now.
Yes, there you go. The echo's gone. I can speak to you. Do you think that drama was able to explore this in a unique way? Because at the time it was written about heavily and it was discussed, but in quite an emotional way, quite, you know, everyone was outraged by what was happening. With this distance and with the power of a drama, do you think you're able to explore this in a different way?
Yeah, I think I was thinking earlier about, you know, the way that drama differs from news or documentary, and I think that distance helps a lot. I think what I wanted to do in writing the script was to acknowledge the humanity of those on both sides, if you want to look at it as an argument, on both sides of the argument, and in fact on both sides of the conflict in Iraq as well. Whereas when I think in the heat of argument, either in the conflict or in the inquiry, there's a very distinct and dynamic of winning and losing. And I think thinking about Brian and thinking about Phil Shiner, if you look at them in a slightly more global sense as sort of aspects of our, the way we like to look at ourselves as a country, I think we have to revere both. You know, we like to think of ourselves as having a martial spirit and also a spirit of fair play. And I think that's sometimes a difficult circle to square. People go off to fight a war, come back, have it analysed. A line that didn't make it into the script, but it's part of it's there in something that Brian says. You know, if these people want to make war illegal, that's up to them. And some people would say that, I suppose, looking at war through a legal lens is going to end up making war illegal. And some people would say hooray to that, and some people would decry that. And I think I don't want to take sides on that, but that, you know, that is a difficult, as I say, that's a difficult circle to square.
Toby, how challenging was it for you to find Phil Shiner the man when so much was obviously written about him and, you know, not necessarily impartially either?
Well, I mean, part of that is trying to ignore other people's comments about him. You're looking at behavior, you're trying to find behavior, but it's based on choices that the drama presents you. And in a way, that distinction between the drama and the real life is kind of, which I've had to do before in parts. You know, you're not playing a real person, you're playing a dramatist's view of a real person. And in that sense, how did I approach it? I suppose, you know, you try and withhold judgment. You try and look for space in the character to show as much of him as you can. Like, what space is he? You know, there's a moment in the drama where the character goes for a run, where Phil you just see him running, and things like that are incredibly useful when you're making a character, because they just give you an opportunity to, you know, this is a white collar character, someone who's existing in the energy and in the business of an office, but seeing them in a different context becomes, you know, disproportionately important compared to, you know, how little time you see him actually running. But to me, this felt very important because there was something about his doggedness, his you know, just his relentlessness that you might be able to suggest with running. Now, I don't know Phil Shiner, but in the drama, that seems more dramatically interesting than just seeing someone spout legal argument. And that's my job, is really to humanize, you know, to build on what Robert's done and to try and humanize and make the choices that he makes, whether the audience think they're right or wrong, or whether they get confused, to make those choices clear, you know. I don't have to have an opinion on all of that. I just have to portray them as clearly as I can. And I suppose in terms of drama, to make them as, you know, comprehensible and as, you know, dynamic and be, you know, interesting and stimulating for an audience, really.
And what also struck me is that human rights lawyers on TV, it's kind of in that kind of morally amazing category of architects, you know, doctors, human rights lawyers. They're always shown a certain way.
Yeah.
And this is very different. He's in this small, chaotic office and, you know, you're invited to make a judgment on what he's doing. That's quite interesting to explore, isn't it?
Yeah, well, lawyers, you know, as my wife, you know, proves, you know, they're very, very busy people. They've got about, you know, at any one time, you know, 20, 30, 40 stories in their head. And what you see in the office is evidence of those stories and the stories, you know, stories that haven't yet been cleared out. And in a way, you could see a lawyer's office as a kind of story hoard, you know, and all the time they're processing and trying to keep up abreast of what is the key story they're dealing with at any one time and the key decisions within that story. So in that sense, I think, you know, lawyers have a lot in common with our business in that way, that they're dealing with narratives and trying to understand narratives and trying to generate narratives based on fact rather than fiction.
And we're going to go to your questions in just a minute, so do remember to put them in the chat box. But as we said, Anthony can't be with us today, but we do have an exclusive clip from Danny Boy. This shows us a discussion that takes place in the film between Brian Wood, played by Anthony Boyle, and his father, Gavin Wood, played by Alex Ferns. We can see the clip.
I thought we were running together. 15 years retired,
Not whinging, are we?
It wasn't cruelty I was teaching you, Brian. It was resilience.
Yeah, I know that, Dad. I got that. You did that.
Look, son. Your mother's worried about you. Is everything okay with you and Lucy?
Yeah. Nice. You know, one minute I was in Alamara, and then next minute I was going in through the door and seeing my baby boy for the first time. So, you know, it's gonna it's gonna be You never killed anybody.
No. I never felt it me to do it. But if I had, I would have. It was Northern Ireland, it's different. You couldn't tell who was friend, who was foe, and it's Northern Ireland, they're our own people, it's the UK.
You know, I trained for it, and I did it, and it works. And you think, fuck, you know, I'm alive and he's dead. And then after,
you know we're here for you, right?
yeah. And then the RMP come knocking on your door.
The RMP? Are you kidding? A decorated war hero? Tell them to piss off.
You can't just tell them. They get your head in a spin, Dad. They get you to start thinking what you didn't.
You did a good job, son. That's what you did. Hey. For 300 years, this family served this country. 12 generations. Those guys, they're right here with us.
Brilliant. As I said, we're going to go to your questions in just a minute, so please do put them in the chat box below. But Sam, I mean, Anthony gives a fantastic performance. Can you give us an insight into what you were looking for in an actor to play that character and what Anthony brings to the role?
I think is just how candid he could be, you know, the rawness of that. And you can see it in those moments there. But yeah, he really did inhabit it. He really went, you know, he went deep into it. You know, he's from Belfast, you know, and he came and basically stayed English for the whole of the shoot. You know, the whole of the period remained English and spoke to me in English accent the whole time. But he just brought a level of candidness and realness to it that was really exciting to work with, and yeah, completely gave himself to it.
And you mentioned about having Brian there on set earlier. How was he able to help Anthony with his performance? Was that part of...
They got on really well and they worked really well together. You know, I mean, it was a concern at first as to how whether, you know, we actually set up a meeting that we aimed to be together for about an hour in the rehearsal room, just talking generally, just to sort of get to know each other. And that session became about 7 hours. You know, and we ended up with chairs and tanks in this rehearsal room, working out exactly how everything happened. But it was also the detail that Brian wanted to give to Anthony. You know, the kind of level of detail, how he actually, you know, would encourage Anthony to take his own beret home and shape it at home in his bathroom, you know, so that putting it on becomes second nature, so it always falls at the right angle, you know, and those kind of details gave Anthony so much confidence, and he was hungry for all of that, you know, he loved all of that. So the detail and the kind of, and just the openness really with which Brian approached the experience. Because we were aware that we were on some fairly cathartic moments for him, you know, and you know, as filmmakers, we found it quite emotional at times, you know, telling some parts of that story, of Brian's story. But he was totally open to it and totally at ease with it as we went into it. So that helped.
It's interesting in a way, isn't it? Because Brian has looked back a lot, and there is an aspect of this drama that is a man, you know, looking back at himself at a much younger age. His commanding officer says to him at one point, you were a kid then and you're not now. And it's interesting to think of Brian himself looking at this young actor going through some facsimile of what he went through.
Yeah,
And Sue, I know you wanted to talk a little bit about the casting as well.
Well, I just Anthony was immediately interested in all of the ambiguities of the role, and his capacity to find those ambiguities exciting, even though they occur within a space of, you know, life and death and morality with one's child and duty to one's father. That made him just utterly compelling. And we were obviously completely honoured to work with Toby as well. It's a rare opportunity to get to work with the legendary Toby Jones. And you know, but I would also say that, you know, it's a rare opportunity. It's not often in a drama like this that you have a key character like Brian, who has himself the maturity and the space and has done the work with himself that allows him to have that relationship with the project and still be able to maintain some creative distance. You know, we have a responsibility to create a story that is separate to Brian's own memory and his own experience. And he has a very generous and a very sympathetic understanding of the other perspectives around his own experience. And in some ways, he was as interested in those as in our coverage of his own part, you know.
And Sam, just before I go to audience questions, I'll put this to you, but feel free to jump in, everyone else. What is it that you hope the audience will take away? What kind of questions do you want them to be asking? What do you want them to take from this drama?
I think the complexity of the issues, you know, and the complexity of sending young men into battle and then kind of not really wanting to face up to some of the darker areas of that, you know, the darker implications of that. But it's twofold. You know, I think Robert and Sue in developing the script just did a wonderful job in being able to sort of keep that balanced line through the storytelling, to sort of keep both things open, you know. So our aim was never to veer too much to one side, not to tell too much of the soldier or too much of the Phil Shiner's legal position, but try to keep both those things open and live, you know, because in some ways you can view the film as, you know, both characters lost through this sequence. You know, both characters, you know, Brian had a very traumatic thing at the beginning and then was taken through this process, and then Phil Shiner had, you know, again was kind of you know, barred at the end of this process, you know, so that he was really badly hurt by this process. So it's a complex story. But I just hope that we manage to shed some light on that, you know, and kind of entertain, but also shed light on it.
I completely agree with Sam, and I would also add, you know, something that that we've thought about quite a lot is to keep the audience in the present rather than applying our retrospective knowledge about events onto the storytelling. So it's so valuable to be able to transport the audience into the present unfolding of something, and to not have the wisdom of hindsight, but to experience those things as they unfold. And you know, for if our audience come away from the film more curious, with asking more questions, as you said that you have done at the end of it, than they perhaps felt that they came to the film with, then I think we've done a good job.
Yeah, because I think the nature of the truth is something that really does come up strongly in the film. And who knows the real nature of the truth? Who, you know, I remember quite often really trying to dig into what I felt really happened in some of these events, to try and imagine them. But it's really hard to get to that truth. Who holds that truth? And certainly that was the problem for the inquiry, was how to sort of access that truth. And the problem for Brian in terms of dealing with himself and his own feelings that came up from a very, very traumatic, difficult military sequence in his life. So I think, you know, that's funny, that trailer, you know, hitting on the truth as a thing that is right at the heart of the story.
Well, and on the question from his son, you know, the boy at school said you were a murderer, and that always animated us and Robert, you know, in terms of storytelling. That always felt like it needed to be a framework, and that Brian somehow would need to navigate his way to form an answer for that.
Okay, let's go to some questions. Got a question from Val here. It's for Toby. She says, Toby, was there anything that you found especially challenging to film, and do you think you'd make a good lawyer?
I found it challenging. Yeah, I did find it challenging. I found just the technical thing of sustained speeches challenging, rather than being broken up. There were long tracking shots and lots of steady cam work, and that's challenging. I mean, it's my job, but it's challenging. I'm not the person to ask whether I'd make a good law. I can think on my feet, but I love hearing about the law on a daily basis. You know, I get to have that, and so I could imagine being intoxicated with that, but I may not have the practical skills.
Thank you, Toby. Lydia says, do you get to shoot the battle scenes abroad, or is that TV wizardry? And did you film all this before the pandemic? Who wants to take that?
We filmed it in Buckinghamshire at a chalk quarry. Yeah, so just outside Watford. That's just, I mean, there was budgetary implications as to whether we ever could have gone abroad, but then within the COVID framework, there was absolutely no way we could go to, I don't know, Morocco or Tenerife or wherever that, you know, to seek that landscape. And there were problems even if we did, because of the kind of hardware and the backup we needed for the scenes. That even if you could find desert, would you necessarily find the military pieces that you needed to make those scenes? So we ended up shooting at a quarry in Buckinghamshire.
And Sue and Sam and others should take credit for, yes, it was all done in COVID times.
Yeah.
Did you have to change anything, or were you able to push on just with social distancing?
I kept being told that I couldn't have any extras. Which I, you know, naturally go, what do you mean we can't have extras? We need more extras for this scene. And it is the one time the producers have completely had the moral high ground and went, no, you can't have any more extras because we can't bring all these people into our bubble. And so yeah, that was
Sam was absolutely incredible, and I do want to tip my hat to the whole team. You know, our producer Simon Lewis, line producer Chris, production manager Alison, for a team to be able to film something as intimate as our piece, with the combat, with the action sequences during the lockdown, under COVID, and to try and keep the COVID out of the audience's experience of the story. That's what I hope that we've achieved. It was immense. And all those people I've just named, they are the unsung heroes behind the scenes who keep the wheels turning and keep throwing the track in front of the train, you know, as it's rolling. And I'm very proud of the entire enterprise. We did it.
Yeah, totally. We did have an amazing crew who came together to make it, and yeah, spectacular.
Question here from John, who's very struck with that clip that we just played. He said, in that clip, Anthony's line, "Have you ever killed anybody?" is asked quite matter-of-factly. There's an ambiguity in his expression. It's very powerful. Was that a directorial choice, or was it Anthony's interpretation?
It's an interesting scene because it went through some phases, that scene. Looking at Robert, you know, in terms of how literal it was, and in truth, we edited some stuff out of that scene to kind of get to that blunt place quicker, is the honest answer. But it felt very true to Brian's experience at that moment, you know, trying to talk to his father who'd had this, you know, with this lineage of military background, to kind of say something as straightforward and as essential as that, to ask that question, felt really, really an amazing piece of writing to me by Robert. So,
and I think this is what we mean about the interest in the generational experience of soldiering. You know, you can have multiple generations, but each generation has a different, their own unique set of experiences, and what that difference between Brian's experience and his father's is something that matters enormously to both men. And you know, as you watch the film, you'll see how that kind of develops and evolves. But it felt like an essential emotional itch that our character needed to scratch. And it's, you know, Sam and Anthony's enormous talent, and Alex's as well, to deliver that so powerfully.
Yes, it's very well done.
Fabulous. Lena here asked Toby, how do you separate your life from filming and characters? I don't know, do you have a method of switching off at the end of a day?
I think that depends on the characters I'm playing. I think, and there's often the preoccupation that you're not really aware of, as a background noise in your head, where you're aware of. The weird thing about acting is it's not like you pick up a musical instrument or a paintbrush to start working. Your sort of work is never ending. And if there's a character that you're thinking about, even if it's in the background, you find that you're sort of exhausted all the time, because somewhere you're sort of scanning your memory for analogous experiences or similar experiences, but you're also looking for that in life. You find unconsciously you're looking for things in life that might help you, and that is exhausting. Then there is a technical thing, I suppose, where I've had in the past with characters where I've had to become someone for most of the day, all day, and as skeptical as I used to be about, I used to think, oh well, you just stop acting. It's different in filming, because in filming time is odd. You might be shooting at odd hours of the day, and so effectively you're on a sort of, that engine is always sort of ticking over. So you don't actually say fully goodbye until someone says that's it. You don't have to do any more of it, and then in a way you can switch off. So I think I used to be much more sort of like, oh, don't be so silly, it's fine, I just stop and start. But actually, I think I've come to realise that it is hard to fully switch off, and sometimes it's not useful to switch off. Actually, it's pretty useful to be constantly thinking about that. You can't sort of stop yourself thinking about it.
There's another question for you, Toby, from Olivia, who says, what was the most memorable part or scene to film for you, and why?
I think the most memorable scene, it was the scene that I loved a lot, was the scene where he's inspiring the students to about what it takes to be a human rights lawyer. And I liked it, one, because it was a technical challenge, just the sustained bravura sort of performance by Phil Shiner. But it also gave you an opportunity to show where his greatness lay, why he was a fantastic human rights solicitor, why he could inspire people. But also, you could also suggest somehow there's a kind of, it's kind of, somewhere it's a little over the top. It's also theatricalized by Robert, and suggests some element of sort of like, wow, these are just students who've come in, and there's an element of almost going too far with it. So within that scene, just that little scene, you get an opportunity to, one, see how admirable he is, but also to how he might be in danger of pushing things too far. And that's fantastic in one scene, to be able to swing in and out of, to oscillate in the way that you want the audience to. You want the audience to go, he's quite funny, he's quite amusing. Also, he's kind of somewhere maybe a bit unstable in this scene.
He does a moment where he gets all the students to role play being soldiers in Basra. And so these university students are all like stiffly holding their rifles, and then he kind of lets it go, and they're all left slightly standing there. It's a really good moment.
It's also, in a film like this, it's also a moment where you're asking students to effectively role play being soldiers. Something so divorced from their experience.
Yeah.
There's something almost comic about it. It's not comic, but there's a sort of comic dislocation in it, which is great in any drama, is where you're playing with tone like that, where you can go, what is this becoming? It's contained by a very serious drama, but within that there's so many different tones you can find.
Fantastic. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for, even though I could keep chatting to you all day. But thank you so much for being here, for sharing your gorgeous film with us. Thank you to Sam, Robert, Sue, and Toby. And thank you for joining us and for all of your questions as well. Here's an exclusive. Danny Boy will be on BBC Two and iPlayer at 9 o'clock on Wednesday, the 12th of May. So you can catch the full film there. For now, though, take care and we'll see you soon.